There are places that were never meant to be disturbed, places that carry the weight of something unspoken, something left behind. When I took a job at an old farm, I thought it would be simple, just watching over an empty property owned by an unpopular man, Mr. Alex Carlos. But I've learned that some things refuse to be forgotten. I didn't have much of a choice. Jobs were scarce, and bills didn't wait. The ad was vague. Overnight security needed for private farmland. No experience required. Good pay. That should have been my first warning. There were stories, of course. People always talk. Neighbors whisper about what they think they know. Some said the land was cursed, that the animals fled long before the last owner did. Others spoke of lights in the fields, strange figures standing between the rows of corn at night. I didn't believe in ghost stories. I believed in a paycheck. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses in, that makes you feel like you're being watched. I walked the perimeter, my flashlight barely cutting through the thick night air. The place was falling apart. Rusted equipment, barn doors that had been hastily boarded up, and something else. Strange markings scratched into the walls. And then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A deep, guttural noise vibrating through the ground. It came from the silo. By the second night, I knew something was wrong. The quiet wasn't just quiet anymore. It was expectant, like the whole farm was holding its breath. Then the small things started. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Tools left in places I hadn't put them. The back gate swinging open when I swore I locked it. Then, around midnight, I heard the whispering. I turned toward the fields, scanning the rows of corn with my flashlight, and that's when I saw them. Eyes. They didn't blink, they didn't move, they just stared. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring back. Then, just as suddenly, they were gone. Not like they had disappeared, more like they had never been there at all. The next morning, I told myself I had imagined it. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I needed to hear it from someone else. Someone who knew this farmland. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. It wasn't long, and I finally met a man. A very strange-looking man, to be exact. "You've lived out here a long time, right?" I asked, as I had my hands in my pocket pretending all was okay. But I knew it wasn't. I had met the man just a few blocks from the private farmland. "Long enough?" the farmer said, lighting a cigarette, exhaling slowly. "I saw something in the corn last night. Eyes," I said slowly. My voice was barely above whispers and laced with anxiety. The farmer goes still. He doesn't look surprised, just tired. Something was very strange about him, like too strange. "Did you look away?" the farmer asked, looking very much unfazed at the whole thing. "What?" I immediately asked, staring at him in shock. That wasn't the response I had expected. Leaning in, his voice low. "If you see it again, don't look away. Ever." His voice was cautious, as if he was warning me of something more deadly than what I had seen already. I wanted to ask more. I wanted answers. But the way the farmer looked at me, like a man who had already buried too many secrets, I knew I wouldn't like what he had to say. So I left. But as I walked back to the farmhouse, the wind picked up, carrying a sound with it. A whisper. And this time, it knew my late grandfather's name. Something had changed. The air was different. The farm wasn't just quiet anymore. It was listening. The silence had a weight to it, pressing down on me, seeping into my skin like damp cold. The second night should have been easier, but it was worse. So much worse. I did my rounds like the night before. Checked the barn, checked the perimeter. Everything looked the same, at first. But then, little things started to feel off. Then came the whispering. It didn't start all at once. First, it was just a sound, like leaves brushing together, a slow shh riding the wind. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized there was no wind. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was just tired. But when I turned toward the cornfield, My flashlight caught something that made my breath freeze in my throat. They were watching me, not like an animal caught in the light, not startled, just waiting, too large, too still, too far apart. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and neither did they. And just like that, they were gone. Not like they had ducked away, not like they had run, just erased. Like they had never been there at all. And somehow, that was worse. I didn't sleep that morning. When the sun came up, I got in my truck and drove. I needed answers. Someone had to know what was going on out there. I wasn't satisfied with the answers old man Benson gave to me. That was what the locals called him. I drove some poles off the farmland, and I saw an old lady staring at me by the side of the road. The road was dusty. It was as if she was reaching out to me. I did not even know when. I hit my brakes and walked out of the car and stood right in front of her. She was old and haggy. Her hair was all disheveled. "Sorry to bother you. You've lived out here a long time, right?" I asked, as though I was under a strange influence. The old lady stared at me and gave the same response as old man Benson. "Long enough," she said. Her voice was too young for her age. She was probably in her early 80s, and it sounded like she was a little girl trapped in an old woman's body. I was immediately taken aback. I wanted to answer if she had met old man Benson yesterday, but something in me prevented me from doing so. Now staring at her, I slowly asked, "I saw something in the cornfields last night, at the old farmland. Do you happen to know what it might be?" My voice was reeking with curiosity and anxiety. The old lady clearly could see that I was desperate for answers. The haggy old lady didn't react right away. She didn't ask what. She didn't even ask if I was sure of what I was saying. She just watches. Her face was completely unreadable. Slowly she asked me, "Did you look away when you saw the creature?" Her voice was now laced with curiosity and urgency. "What? Why do you ask?" I say slowly, my eyes locked onto her eyes. The old lady didn't say a thing for 3 seconds. Then her voice came lower and graver with the same warning that old man Benson had given me yesterday. "If you see it again, don't look away. Ever." Her voice was cold and detached as she turned immediately and walked into her old apartment. Staring at me one more time, she closed the door with a loud bang that made me shudder backwards immediately. Taking a deep, calculated breath, I left the farmhouse more unsettled than before. She didn't tell me what it was. She didn't tell me what it wanted, just like old man Benson. As I stepped out of my truck, the air felt thicker, like something had shifted in my absence. I took a breath, steadying myself. Then, just as I reached the farmhouse door, I heard it. A whisper, but not like before, not distant, not indistinct. This time, I heard it clearly. A single word carried on the wind. My name. The whisper was calling out to me. I turned around and looked. I didn't see anything. My heart raced a bit as I stared at the wooden farm door as the cold night wind rattled it by. Its hinges. I didn't run. I didn't breathe. And I didn't look away. The third night was different. The first two had been quiet, unsettling, wrong. But this was something else. This wasn't just watching shadows in the fields or hearing things where there should have been nothing. This was something closer. I was in the security office when it started. The monitors in front of me cast a dull glow, their screens flickering between camera angles. The porch, the barn, the edge of the cornfield. It had become routine by now. Watch, listen, wait for morning. I told myself it would be fine, that I'd seen all there was to see. Then the radio crackled. At first, it was just static. I barely even noticed. But as the minutes passed, the hum grew louder, shifting in tone, almost rhythmic, like something breathing through the speakers. I turned the volume down. It didn't help. The sound kept coming, pushing against the edges of the room, pressing into my skull. Then, beneath the crackle, I heard it. A voice. Not clear, not distinct, just my name, stretched and warping through the interference. I froze. It was impossible. The radio wasn't connected to any active channels. There was no one else on the farm. And yet, there it was. My name. Again. And again. Then the monitors glitched. For a second, just a flicker, the barn camera cut out, replaced with rolling static. And when it came back, there was something there. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. A figure, a shape, just standing at the entrance of the barn. It wasn't moving, just there, still. I leaned in. The screen distorted again, the feed jumping, static lines rippling across the image. But when the distortion cleared, the thing in the frame had changed. It wasn't standing anymore. It was bending. Its limbs were twisted at unnatural angles, like a marionette with half-cut strings. Its head hung too far to the side, almost upside down. And yet, somehow, it was looking right at the camera. I felt something cold creep up my spine. The feed flickered again. The figure was closer. No movement, no transition. One frame, it was at the barn entrance. The next, it was halfway to the camera. I stopped breathing. Another glitch, another jump. Now it was just feet away. Its face was still unreadable, the shadows swallowing most of its features. But its mouth, that was the only thing I could make out. It was open, too wide, like it had been caught mid-scream, but no sound was coming out. The radio screeched suddenly, the static cutting into my eardrums. I slammed my hand on the volume knob, twisting it all the way down. When I looked back at the screen, the barn was empty. The figure was gone. I stared, pulse hammering in my ears. Then the radio crackled one last time, and in the lowest, most breathless whisper, I heard it say, "Come outside." I don't remember grabbing the flashlight. I don't remember stepping onto the porch. All I know is that the moment I did, I felt it. The air was thick, heavy, like the pressure before a storm, but worse. I could taste it on my tongue, feel it pressing against my skin. And then I heard the pounding. Deep, slow, deliberate. It was coming from the barn. I took a step forward, then another. My boots crunched against the dirt, every sound amplified by the unnatural silence. The flashlight beam wobbled as I lifted it, my hand unsteady. The barn doors stood just ahead, their old wooden panels shivering under the force of whatever was hitting them from the inside. I swallowed hard. That barn was supposed to be empty. I reached the doors and lifted the flashlight. That's when I saw the padlock. Old, rusted, and covered in scratches. I didn't understand. I had checked this barn 100 times. There had never been a lock. The doors were supposed to be free-moving, easy to swing open. But now, something was keeping them shut. Something inside. Another bang rattled the wood. I flinched, heart slamming against my ribs. Then, silence. I exhaled shakily. My fingers hovered over the padlock. It looked old, but not weak. The scratches around it were deep, jagged, as if something had tried to claw its way out. A part of me knew I should turn back, walk away, call someone, but who? Who would believe me? Another thud. This one softer, almost desperate. I pressed my ear against the door before I could stop myself. Silence. Then, a whisper. Just on the other side of the wood. "Let me out." I recoiled so fast, I nearly tripped over my own feet. My breath came in quick, panicked bursts. No, that wasn't possible. The barn was empty. It had to be empty. The whisper came again, softer this time. "Please." A shudder ran through me. I turned, walking quickly, too quickly, back toward the house. My legs felt unsteady, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the doorknob. I shoved myself inside, slamming the door behind me. I pressed my back against the wood, eyes wide, ears straining for any sound outside. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a chuckle. Low, wet, wrong. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The chuckle rose into something between a laugh and a ragged inhale, like whatever was making it had forgotten how lungs were supposed to work. And then, silence. I stayed there, frozen against the door, for what felt like hours. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but nothing else moved. When I finally worked up the courage to check the barn through the monitors, the padlock was still there. The doors were shut. But now, there was a single, fresh scratch across the wood. And I knew I wasn't the only one awake on this farm. I didn't waste time. The moment the laughter stopped, I grabbed my keys and bolted for the truck. My boots hit the dirt hard, breath sharp and ragged in the cold night air. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't planning. There was only one thought in my head. Leave. Now. The barn loomed behind me, its dark silhouette stretching against the night sky. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I reached the truck, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. The keys fumbled in my shaking hands. I jammed them into the ignition, twisting hard. Nothing. The engine didn't even cough. I turned the key again. Nothing. I hit the steering wheel, panic clawing up my throat. Not now. Not now, damn it, I exclaimed in anger and frustration. I tried again. The engine wheezed, sputtered, almost caught. Then silence. And then a sound outside, something moving. Not footsteps, not an animal. Something else. I swallowed hard, my hands frozen on the keys. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, but I could feel it. Something circling the truck, something watching. I locked the doors. The headlights flickered as I tried the ignition again. In that split second of dim light, I saw it. A figure, just beyond the trees, standing at the edge of the field. Too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew it was staring right at me. I stopped breathing. The figure didn't move, didn't shift or sway. It just stood there, its shape barely visible in the darkness. Then, just as the headlights flickered back to life, it was gone. I gasped, twisting in my seat, searching the field. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was still out there. I shoved the door open and ran. I didn't think. I just ran. The farmhouse was too far. The barn was worse. But the silo, the old grain silo at the back of the property, that was closer. I sprinted across the field, my breath burning in my throat. The dirt was uneven, catching my steps, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard movement. Not footsteps, not heavy human strides. Something faster, something crawling. I threw myself against the silo door, wrenching it open, and stumbled inside. Darkness swallowed me whole. I spun around and slammed the door shut. My fingers fumbled for the lock. Click. Secure. Silence. I pressed my back against the cold metal wall, chest heaving. My flashlight flickered weakly as I lifted it, the dim beam barely cutting through the dark. The air inside was thick, dusty. I turned, letting the light sweep over the interior. The grain had long since been removed, leaving only dirt, rusted beams, and the stench of old decay. Then the beam caught something else, a shape, low to the ground. I took a cautious step forward, my stomach twisting. It was a body, not just one, several. Bones half buried in the dirt, some old, some newer. I gagged, stumbling back, my foot catching on something. I glanced down. A book. A tattered, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I hesitated, then reached for it. The cover was scratched, as if something with claws had raked over it. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. The handwriting was frantic, uneven. The words bled together in places, written in what looked like shaking hands. It sees, it knows. Don't run, don't hide. If you see it, don't look away. I turned the page and the writing continued. It's not human, it never was. The fields belong to it. The barn is a door. The house is a trap. The silo is... The sentence stopped. The ink trailed off in a long, jagged streak. I flipped to the last page. One sentence was written in large letters. It's in here with me. A sound. Low. Rumbling. Behind me. I froze. The growl was deep, wet, guttural. Not an animal, not human. Something else. Slowly, I lifted the flashlight. The beam shook as I turned. And then, I saw it. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The silence inside the silo wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that listened, that watched, that waited. The growl had stopped, but the air was thick, charged with something ancient, something that had been here long before I arrived. I gripped the flashlight tighter. The beam wavered as I turned, scanning the dark, rusted interior. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the shadows, a silhouette that didn't belong, standing unnaturally still between the support beams. My breath hitched, my body locked in place. Then, it moved. Not like a person, not like an animal. It unfolded, rising too tall, its limbs stretching in ways that made my stomach churn. Its bones creaked as it straightened, its head tilting to the side, like it was studying me. I couldn't breathe. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were nothing but hollow pits, deep and dark, as if they had been carved straight into its skull. It had no mouth, but it whispered, a low, rasping chant, in a language I couldn't understand. The sound crawled under my skin, slipping into my ears, pressing against my skull like something alive. I stumbled back. The journal fell from my hands, its pages fluttering open on the dirt. The thing twitched. Its body lurched forward in a single, unnatural movement, closing the distance between us in an instant. I choked on a scream, scrambling away. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering as if struggling against the presence of whatever this thing was. Then it spoke. Not in words, not in a voice. Inside my head.
You do not belong here.
The whisper slithered through my thoughts, cold and wet, like fingers trailing across my brain. My vision blurred. My knees buckled.
You will feed the soil.
The flashlight died, and the darkness swallowed me whole. I don't remember running. I don't remember breaking through the silo doors, stumbling into the night, gasping for air that no longer felt real. All I knew was that the thing was coming. I could feel it behind me, moving fast, moving wrong. The barn. The thought hit me like a lightning bolt. The barn, the fire. I ran. My legs felt weak, my lungs burned, but I forced myself forward. The barn loomed ahead, its silhouette monstrous against the night sky. I hit the doors hard, wrenching them open. The scent of dust and old wood filled my nostrils as I stumbled inside. My hands scrambled at my pockets, pulling out the matches I had taken from the farmhouse. It wasn't enough. My eyes darted around, searching. There, a half-full can of gasoline, left forgotten near the rusted farm tools. I grabbed it, tearing off the cap, and started pouring. The pounding footsteps behind me grew louder. It was coming. I struck a match. The tiny flame flickered weakly in the dark. Then I dropped it. The fire roared to life. It spread fast, licking up the wooden walls, racing across the gasoline-soaked floor. Smoke billowed, thick and choking, filling the barn with a hellish glow. Then I saw it. Standing in the flames. The thing did not burn. It writhed, its body twisting, its hollow eyes locked onto me, its whispers turned to screams, inhuman, echoing, shaking the walls. And for the first time, I saw fear in its movements. It wasn't invincible. It shrank back, its body flickering like a shadow in the firelight. The flames climbed higher, devouring everything in their path. And then, it vanished. Gone. The whispers stopped. The air felt lighter. I staggered back, watching as the barn collapsed inward, the fire consuming everything. The night was filled with the crackling of burning wood, the distant wail of something that no longer had a voice. I collapsed onto the ground. The sky was turning grey, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. I had survived. But as I lay there, gasping for breath, one thought chilled me to the bone. The barn was gone. The thing was gone. But the land still belonged to it. I thought it was over. I told myself the fire had done its job, that the thing, whatever it was, had died in the flames. I left the farm behind. I never looked back. But the thing about some places is, you don't just leave, they follow. I didn't go home right away. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, too exhausted to drive any farther. The weight of the past few nights pressed down on me like a sickness. I barely made it into the room before I collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came fast, too fast. And then, a sound. Soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. My eyes snapped open. The motel room was dark, the air conditioner humming dully. But that wasn't the sound I'd heard. I turned onto my side, staring at the nightstand. The motel alarm clock glowed 3:33 a.m. in red digital numbers. Then, from the radio on the dresser, static. I sat up, my pulse spiking. I hadn't turned it on. The volume climbed, the static hissing louder, filling the room with that same cold, wet sound that had crawled into my head at the farm. Then, beneath the static, a voice, low, ragged.
You do not belong here.
I lunged forward, ripping the cord from the wall. The radio went silent. But the motel room didn't feel empty. The air felt thicker, the shadows longer. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand. My body ached. My mind screamed at me to leave. But leave where? I turned toward the bathroom, flicking on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed harshly, flickering once before stabilizing. I gripped the edge of the sink, splashing cold water onto my face. My reflection stared back, my skin pale, my eyes bloodshot. Then it blinked, but I hadn't. My breath stopped. The reflection moved. A slow, deliberate tilt of the head, not mine. And then, behind me, a shape, tall, twisted, hollow eyes staring back at me through the mirror. My heart stopped. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. But the mirror was wrong. My reflection was still staring at something behind me. A cold breath grazed my ear, and the whisper returned. You do not belong here. The lights flickered. The air turned suffocating. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. Glass shattered, and the room went completely dark. I didn't sleep that night, and when dawn came, I left the motel, but I didn't go home. Because I knew the truth now. The barn had burned, the farm was abandoned, but the thing had never been trapped there. It was never bound to the land. It was bound to me. 3 weeks later, I returned to the farmland. Not because I wanted to, not because I was brave, because I had to know. The farm was still there. The barn was gone. Only blackened rubble remained. The silo stood empty. The house, with its rotting walls and broken windows, leaned into the wind. But the land still felt wrong. I stood at the edge of the field, staring at the ruin I had left behind, and then, from the tree line, a shadow moved, tall, twisted, watching. The wind whispered through the fields, and beneath it, I swear I heard something else. Something that sounded a lot like my name. Would you have stayed on that farm? Let me know in the comments.